everyone. Welcome back to Pan-Africanism Reawakening. It's been a while, but I'm happy to be back. And today I'm bringing you one of the hottest topics in Africa. Yes, we want to get rid of dictators in Africa. We want to get rid of monarchies in Africa. And today we are dwelling on Africa's oldest and Africa's longest dictator in reign. That is President Paul Biya of Cameroon, the 91-year-old president with 43 years of failure and oppression in Cameroon. This topic is very dear to my heart, and I really want us to go into it detailedly. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, for over 4 decades, Paul Biya has held an iron grip on power in Cameroon, ruling with impunity, while systematically dismantling the country's foundations. Yes, I said he's the longest dictator or the oldest dictator in Africa. A man who ascended to the presidency of Cameroon in 1982. Not through a fair democratic process. This is what we must know. Paul Biya was never really elected into office in 1982. He didn't come through a fair democratic process, but through the back door of an arranged power transfer with the former President Amadou Ahidjo. Biya has made a mockery, ladies and gentlemen, a mockery of the very idea of governance, democracy, and justice. These are the kind of leaders that Africa must get rid of. We should get them out of office. His reign now stretches into its 43rd year. 43rd year. He came to power in 1982. Yes, has been marked, and all these 43 years have been marked by deepening crisis, a nation worse than what you can describe, and a nation whose potential was squandered and whose people have been condemned to a life of oppression and hopelessness. This is the life of the people of La République du Cameroon. Biya's promises of modernization, reforms, and prosperity have only delivered misery, corruption, and an increasing desolate society for the people of Cameroon. And yet, he presents himself as a presidential candidate for the upcoming October elections in La République du Cameroon. And we will look into this in details. How you allowed a 91-year-old man who does not reason for himself or cannot even make decisions for himself to rule a nation. Let's talk about his early years, or the early years of this deception that was called Cameroon. So, ladies and gentlemen, Biya's rise to power was not as a result of people's will. No, it wasn't as a result of the will of the people of Cameroon, but of a reign that had long overlived its legacy. In 1982, when President Amadou Ahidjo, the first president of Cameroon, resigned under mysterious circumstances, because it was really not stated, mysterious circumstances, then he made Biya. He handpicked Biya as his successor, and he announced to the people of Cameroon at that time and called him his constitutional heir. So his successor, Paul Biya, assumed the presidency of Cameroon. While the transfer of that power was presented as a smooth transition, it was clear from the onset that Biya was merely a puppet. Yes, he was handpicked. And you know, when we talk of handpicked, it's not just, he was not handpicked by Amadou Ahidjo himself. He was handpicked by France. Ahidjo barely did the bidding of France. So he was handpicked and placed there. He was just a placeholder in the system designed to maintain the status quo. for those that govern, and that those that govern, we all know who govern. So in the beginning, there were promises. Biya promised reforms. He spoke of openness, and he pledged to tackle corruption. But like most of these preachers or speeches that they make when they are trying to gain people, or to gain the will of people, these promises were mere empty words. With the years, the reality began to evidence itself. Yes, his rule was not about progress, but about consolidating power, and amassing wealth, and crushing any opposition that dared to challenge the system. This is the rule. He ruled with iron fist, and he's still ruling with that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the corrupt nature of Cameroon. Biya's government became a model of corruption. It has been ranked multiple times like the first most corrupt country in the world. It came the third, it came the second, the seventh. His personal wealth, hidden in Swiss bank's account, rose exceptionally while the majority of Cameroonians lived in abject poverty. The country's resources were mismanaged, siphoned off by Biya and his inner circle. While hospitals lacked basic supplies, schools were underdeveloped, and the economy, once considered one of the most promising in Central Africa, crumbled to its worst. The Cameroonian elites, loyal to Biya, this is what they do, became rich while the poor, while the people, especially those in the rural areas, were left with nothing. They remained poor. The rich become richer, and the poor remain poorer. So what should have been a time of development and prosperity under his leadership instead became a period of plunder and neglect. The infrastructures decayed, the health system decayed, and the health system collapsed, and the educational system became the worst. Failed generation of young people. Biya's government did not care about the people. It cared only about maintaining its grip on power. And if it means to sacrifice all the young people in Cameroon to stay in power, Biya's government is ready to do so. But why are we even talking about this old dictator in Africa? We have seen how young African leaders have risen to the hem, and they have developed their nations in a twinkle of an eye. I am more concerned about the part that concerns Ambazonia. So let us talk about the crisis in southern Cameroon. Yes. The returning point came in the late 2016, began to demand justice. The frustration, long ignored by the Biya's regime, reached a breaking point that could no longer be contained. So discrimination against the people of southern Cameroon's Ambazonia had been institutionalized for decades and decades in a sham union that our parents thought we got into. Schools in that particular part of the country in southern Cameroon lacked basic resources. The judiciary was heavily francophonized, knowing fully well that the common law system is completely different from the French civil law. Then employment opportunities were completely scarce in Ambazonia, in southern Cameroon. So when in 2016, the peaceful protests, teachers and lawyers started protesting peacefully, demanding linguistic equality, and these people were met with violent repression by the Biya regime and his government. So what started as a peaceful demand for justice quickly spiraled into a full-blown conflict that is today has lasted for the last 8 years. With the Cameroon military deploying brutal tactics to silence dissent, silence the freedom of speech, silence political human rights defenders. The response was not just militarizing the Ambazonia, it was also designed to erase the very identity of the people of Southern Cameroons. The Biya's government labeled peaceful protesters as separatists. And you ask yourself, who are separatists? He labeled them separatists, he labeled them terrorists and enemies of the state. The freedom of speech, the freedom to protest, it's all spelled out in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and all international human rights law, where citizens can freely express themselves. But when teachers and lawyers stood up to express their basic fundamental human rights, they were attacked as separatists, they were attacked as terrorists, and they were attacked as enemies of the state. And since then, they have been arrested, tortured, disappeared, maimed, brutally killed, and many of them are nowhere to be found. Thousands of civilians were killed, and hundreds of thousands were displaced, and both internally and externally within Ambazonia and out of Ambazonia. A generation of young Cameroonians were forced to start killing Ambazonians because they work in the military. A generation of young Ambazonians, Southern Cameroonians, were also forced to go into exile. The crisis in Southern Cameroon continues to this day with no resolution in sight, all while Biya remains obstinate and indifferent to the suffering of the people of Ambazonia. Let us look at his dictatorship. Let us look at how he's been ruling that country, his country, Cameroon. What is perhaps the most alarming about Biya is not just his failure to govern, but his absolute detachment from the reality of the suffering of his countrymen, Cameroonians. For years, Biya has been accused of failing to address the most basic needs of his people. His absence from the country, his prolonged stays in Europe, in Swiss hotels, and his disregard for the crisis at home have left Cameroonians wondering, who does Biya truly serve? But those of us in Ambazonia, we sure know who he serves. But the people of Cameroon over the years have never understood who he serves. Biya is often described as a man of the palace, completely disconnected from the day-to-day struggle of ordinary Cameroonians. Yes, his citizens, he does not even know what is happening with them. His speeches, when he makes them, they are all filled with vague promises and are always tied with lies and lies and lies. And these are situations that rarely come to pass. They rarely come to fruition. He lives in a war where political dissents are crushed. Human rights dissents or human rights defenders are trampled upon. And the economy continues to decline, but he doesn't care. As long as he stays in power, as long as he has his grip in power, he doesn't care if the roads have become the worst forms of road networks in the whole world. He doesn't care. Meanwhile, he remains in power, protected by a network of corrupt officials, military forces loyal to him. And this is how he has been ruling over the years. Why has the international community been very silent about this situation? Why is the international community so silent? Why Cameroonians suffer, the international community stands largely silent? And that is the question we ask. We have seen how the international community condemns other dictators across the globe, calling for their resignation, but yet they endorse Paul Biya's a term of office for this upcoming presidential election, a 91-year-old man who can barely walk, who cannot even speak for himself, who sits and fat in conferences, who does not even know who is standing beside him, and yet they endorse him to stand as the president of a nation. What is the interest, and why are they protecting him? The same countries that preach democracy, human rights, have turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed under Biya's regime, especially the atrocities in Ambazonia. The United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, they have all failed to hold Biya accountable for his abuses and the atrocities he commits in Ambazonia. The international community must act. The United Nations must hold Biya accountable for the atrocities in southern Cameroon. I'm more concerned with what happens in southern Cameroon. And for his failure to protect the lives and the rights of the people of Ambazonia, I mean the international community. Let us now go into details of this video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down in segments by segments. Segments by segments. At 91 years old, Biya stands as Africa's oldest dictator and the world's longest serving non-royal head of states. But behind the decades of power lies a legacy of broken reforms, mass killings, corruptions, embezzlement, and a silent population. So, in this particular excerpt, ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring out all of those for you to see who Paul Biya truly is. So, in 1975, Paul Biya was appointed Prime Minister by the then President of Cameroon, Amadou Ahidjo. Just 7 years later, in 1982, Biya became the president of Cameroon by single-handedly being appointed, handpicked by Amadou Ahidjo. Something that people considered a peaceful transition, or so it seemed at the time. But what followed was a brutal purge. Amadou Ahidjo himself was exiled by the same person he called his constitutional hell. Oppositions were silenced, political space crushed, and the rise of an imperial presidency began. That is what happened. In 1996, Biya introduced a constitution that gave hope. Term limits, decentralization, rule of law. But by 2008, all that was gone. Term limits were erased, and decentralization a phantom promise. Today, Biya runs Cameroon like a monarch, without accountability and without any form of shame. Nobody holds him accountable. He does what he wants and what will keep him in power. Let's look at the various constitutional changes that have taken place in the Biya's regime. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us look at this. This is Paul Biya, Africa's oldest dictator, 43 years in power. So by 1982, multiple changes to the constitution abolished term limits. So by 1997, rigged elections, entrenched regime. In 2008, suppresses opposition and dissents. By 2016, the Ambazonian conflict escalated. Yes. Then, by 2020, corruption hits extreme levels. By 2025, healthcare collapses completely broken. Education is completely broken. Biya is 43 years of authoritarian rule and suffering of southern Cameroonians. Yet the world remains silent. Let us look at what he's been doing. These are just some of the things that describe who Paul Biya of Cameroon is. Let us bring up more statistics on his rule. What are some of the reforms that he has claimed to make over the years? And all of these reforms have been failed reforms. Failed reforms. Yes, yes, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, when we talk about most the failed reforms of Cameroon, of President Paul Biya of Cameroon, the same person that has been in power for 43 years, you see that his educational system has been a failure in itself. Yes, Cameroon has failed woefully in its educational reforms. Today, ghost schools are littered in rural areas in Cameroon. There are other areas in his country, in Cameroon, that don't even have basic schools. Basic schools, just primary schools, they don't even have those in Cameroon. And that is somebody that has been in power for the last 43 years. Let's talk about the healthcare system. The healthcare system is porous. It's just the worst you can ever think of in Africa. Cameroon still has less than 3 doctors per 10,000 people in the hospital. A country that has been ruled by the same individual for 43 years. And do you want to talk about the anti-corruption drive? Just a weapon against political rivals. That is what he does. His reforms have all been failed. Let me bring you to what has been the forgotten war in Ambazonia, the Ambazonian crisis. Let's talk about the Ambazonian crisis in a bit. Let me bring up some statistics on that. Ladies and gentlemen, let us talk about the crisis in Ambazonia, the Ambazonian crisis. The villages, the burned villages. Let me just pick apart the burned villages in Ambazonia from 2017 up to 2024. From 2017 to 2024, entire communities have been razed to the ground, completely wiped out from Ambazonia. From Bali to Manfe, from Kumba to Muyoka, fire replaced peace, blood replaced dialogue. It's not just a conflict. It's a full-blown war. It's a full-blown war. The Ambazonia crisis has destroyed over 200 villages, destroyed by Cameroon military. Military moved into communities, set villages ablaze, not just villages, but human beings in these communities. They burned them all together. We are talking about a 43-year reign of a 91-year-old president. His failures, what he has done, and the pain he has caused in the African continent. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me add this image of villages that have been burned within Ambazonia. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see on my screen, all the red dots, these red dots you see, these are burned villages in Ambazonia. Over more than 200 to 300 villages completely erased in our communities. These villages were not just burned alone. Our elderlies were burned in them, children burned in them. And this is the story of Ambazonia. So, these villages, and you ask yourself, but who were those that burned down these villages or that caused erased these communities? And I can tell you here now that these are Cameroon military officers. If you can see the very dark square here, that's a military base. That's a military base. So since 2017, the war against the people of Southern Cameroon took another genocidal turn. Yes, it took another turn. What you least expected happened in Ambazonia. Entire villages have been razed to the ground. Sometimes overnight, even without, often at times, people without any form of warning. They come in the night where people are sleeping and they set the communities ablaze. This is how treacherous and devilish these people are. Over 200 and something villages, or almost 300 villages, have been burned completely, and over 600 villages have been burned partially. And these statistics are gotten via independent reports. Homes, schools, communities, marketplaces, hospitals too have been set ablaze by the same rogue military of La République du Cameroon. Elderly citizens, like I said earlier, have been burned alive in these villages, in these communities. Children shot, and then their bodies taken back into in their houses and set ablaze. Shot at very point-blank range. This is what Cameroon military does. Ladies and gentlemen, these are not accidents. All these things are not just accidents. They are systematic acts of terror designed by Cameroon to erase the identity of the people of Ambazonia. We have satellite images that show scorched earth policies that mimic those seen in war-torn regions like Darfur, what happened in Rwanda, in other parts of the world. We have BBC documentaries. We have Amnesty International documentaries that showcase all of these incidences I'm mentioning here. And the funniest thing is Biya he denies all of this in Europe. He refused to accept that there is even a war in Ambazonia. Ambazonia, while he lives in Europe, his children live in America and all of that, the children of Ambazonia sleep in forests. Entire generations are traumatized beyond recovery. This is not a civil conflict. It is a war of extermination. This is what it is. And the funniest thing is the war remains silent. Shamefully so, they remain silent. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk. This is just the little of what is happening in Ambazonia. I just wanted to show you that map of the communities that have been completely erased. Over almost 300 communities have been completely erased. More than 600 villages have been partially destroyed. I told you that we were going to look into this segment by segment. And you think that only the children of Ambazonia are suffering, even they themselves, Cameroonians, are suffering. And let us talk about brain drain. Often at times you hear people say, oh, they have the highest form of education. Let's talk about brain drain and the damage it has caused to Cameroon itself. While Paul Biya stays in power for over 43 years, a 91-year-old man, guess what? His citizens are migrating to Europe, the United States, North America, South Africa, Southern Africa, and crossing over to using all sort of risks, like crossing with in the Sahara Desert. They are all leaving because they have no hope in Cameroon. Yes, this is how you see the migration flows. You see them moving from 2011 to 2022. You see how they migrate to Europe. They migrate to the United States, North Africa, even North America. They move even to Southern African countries, crossing and using all sorts of risks to get out of Cameroon because there is no hope for them for Cameroon in Cameroon. So Cameroon is not just losing lives, why in its country currently, but it's also losing its finest brains. Engineers are gone, doctors are going, innovators are all fleeing because there is no hope for them in Cameroon. Everyone under the Biya's regime, any genius, the one that has been somebody that can innovate and come up with something is not looked upon as a hope for the nation. It's often referred to as a curse. Young Cameroonians are not dreaming at all. They are not dreaming. They have no hope. All they do is eat bread and sardine, live in dorms. They are drowning to escape, but they cannot because they don't even have a mind of their own. Their minds have been intoxicated with alcohol. Let it be known that Cameroon is experiencing one of the most devastating brain drains in Africa. The people are fleeing. The people fleeing, they are not just fleeing because of the unemployment. They are also fleeing because of the desperation, the doctors, engineers, university lecturers, you often hear they are fighting to get fellowship programs abroad, and all those stuff is because there is no hope for them in Cameroon. And so they're desperately looking for means through which they can flee and make a living out of Cameroon. You see, this is how they move. They move from continent to continent because there is no hope for them in Cameroon. And yet a 91-year-old man stands as president in the upcoming presidential election in Cameroon. Ladies and gentlemen, under the Biya's regime, the nation's brightest minds have often taken to the desert and the sea. Hundreds have died crossing the Sahara Desert or drowned in the Mediterranean Sea looking for greener pasture, fleeing a government that sees no value in their existence or in their experiences. Let's say between 2017 to 2024, the number of asylum applications from Cameroonian in Europe has tripled. The same people who refuse to even acknowledge that there is a crisis in Cameroon, they are the same people who go about using the same Ambazonian crisis to seek for international protection in different parts of the world. Unfortunately for them, Donald Trump has ended that in America. Universities, thousands of graduates leave the university each year with little interest in returning to Cameroon. Little interest in returning to Cameroon. Universities across Cameroon are struggling to retain talent. Why? They don't have. Everybody wants to have a better life. They flee because the country is deplorable. The country is destroyed. There is no room for them to grow. Hospitals suffer from chronic understaffing. And nurses and physicians migrate to other parts of the world to look for a better life because the system is damaged and destroyed. Because a 91-year-old man sits as the head of that country. Biya is the surgeon who refuses to bleed. And do you want us to talk about corruption? Or let us even just bring a little bit of comparison to Paul Biya. Yes, let us bring a little bit of. First, let us even talk about the failed system, the failed reforms that have taken place in Cameroon. All those failed reforms, let's put them in image form so that somebody can really understand what we're talking about today. These are his most notable failed reforms since 1982 that he took part. These are just a few anyway. These are just a few that I was able to pull. Let's talk about what he, in 1996, he talked about decentralization, right? Transfer of power to regional councils. He promised 28 years later, effect worsening the crisis in Ambazonia. Anti-corruption campaigns, tackle corruption in Cameroon. What does he promise? Tactical arrest of opposition, inner circle protected, effect continuous system corruption. That's it. Then let's talk about the educational reforms in 2002 to 2010. Universal basic education strikes. Look at this. What was the promise? He talked about still less than 3 doctors per 10,000 people. The effect costly medical tourism. This is what is happening in Cameroon. We talk about infrastructural development plan. Infrastructural development plan vision. He talked about vision what 2035. Look at it. Crumble roads, networks, resources wasted, increase inequality. This is what the Biya regime continued to promise its failed people. When you look at this President Paul Biya, you want to ask yourself, how come he's been in power for this number of years? How come he's been in power for this number of years? And yet, we all know that he rules his country from another part of the world. He lives in Switzerland and rules his country. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is his GDP versus his leadership in absenteeism. We all know that Paul Biya of Cameroon has never been in his country for a month directly, for a whole month. He is never in his country. He lives abroad in luxurious hotels in Switzerland. He has rented an entire building, entire hotel in Switzerland. That is where he lives. That's his presidency. His presidency is not in Cameroon. So why the economy, Cameroon's economy crumbles, stagnates, and millions go hungry, Paul Biya of Cameroon has become notorious, is known for his extended stays in five-star hotels across Europe, especially in Switzerland. Everybody knows about Paul Biya's stays in these luxurious Swiss hotels. Between 2006 and 2023, Biya spent over 1,500 days abroad. No, that is even less. Over 2,500 days abroad. More than 5 years. More than 5 years outside the country. It is estimated that his foreign travels have cost Cameroon's treasury over 65 millions, not including the entourage and security personnel who accompany him. These are the estimates that we are getting. And again, during these same years, Paul Biya of Cameroon, or Cameroon's GDP growth has remained struggling. Never matching regional counterparts like Rwanda or Cote d'Ivoire or any other emerging African countries. The nation's debts balloons and the cost of basic goods skyrocketed. Hospitals locked, bandaged, while Paul Biya's hotels suite burst with gold-plastered bathtubs. That is the legacy of the man that they are still voting to become president in 2025. They still want him to stand as a presidential candidate. Or, of course, he's already stood as a presidential candidate. So this is just irresponsibility on the part of this guy. And to think that Cameroonians still sit there and promote and support him to be president is what is most baffling. Leadership is not just about being present in name, it's about being present in action. And this is what Paul Biya of Cameroon lacks from day one. Paul Biya of Cameroon has been absent from his presidency from day one, physically, morally, economically, he's been absent. This is a fact. This is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. Let us once again talk about the forgotten war in Ambazonia. Let me just bring down the brutal crackdown on southern Cameroons, the burning of villages, killing of civilians, mass displacements, arbitrary arrests and torture, sentencing of people to life imprisonment in absentia. But yet the international community largely remains silent. Biya regime refuses to dialogue, preferring military solution to legitimate grievances. And this is what is happening in Ambazonia. And yet the war is pushing on somebody who has massacred children, women, to continue to be a leader in a particular country. On the screen, ladies and gentlemen, is Cameroon's corruption trajectory from 1996 to 2024. Transparency International CIP, visual description. This is what they ranked Cameroon. A timeline graphic showing all of this. And so, Cameroon. So the corruption under Biya hasn't just been tolerated, it's been institutionalized. It has actually been institutionalized. Since Transparency International began tracking corruption rankings in the mid-1990s, Cameroon has consistently been among the worst performing countries globally. Cameroon has consistently been among the worst performing countries globally, ladies and gentlemen. And yet, this is a country that is ruled by a 91-year-old dictator who has been in power for 43 years, surrounded by corrupt individuals who feed on nothing but the blood and the resources of their nation, while their citizens, they die in abject poverty, die of curable diseases because there is lack of hospitals, no education, no good road networks, and yet he stands for presidency in 2025. In 1998 and 1999, Cameroon ranked as the most corrupt country in the whole world. In the whole world. The graph is there on the screen for you to see. And while a few anti-corruption campaigns like Operation Spiral Hawk made headlines, they were largely used to settle political scores, targeting rivals instead of the corrupt politicians or the ones that have been stealing resources in the government. They were not reforming the system at all. They were using it to target political rivals. Paul Biya would do anything to hold his grip in power. Billions have disappeared in public funds, unaccounted for. Ministers, directors, and high-level officials live in opulence while rural communities survive without electricity or even clean water. Roads remain potholes, ridden, and the government schools crumble because the money meant for development fits the elites. This is a system that people are still voting a 91-year-old man to govern them. Biya's Cameroon isn't just a corrupt system, it is a kleptocracy. While loyalty to the regime is rewarded and accountability is a foreign concept in that system. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see yourself on the screen, this is what Cameroon looks like. Look at all of these figures. Look at this. Look at how high they were. The various years. You see, these are figures from why has he remained in power over the years? Why others have come and left, others even died, but yet Cameroon President Paul Biya remains a dictator for life. Let us even compare him to other African leaders who have come and left. These are African leaders that took offices during the time of Paul Biya, the same year that Paul Biya came to power. And they have died or they've left, but then Paul Biya remains in power. So let us look at this. We've seen Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso came and died. Mahamadou Buhari came, left Nigeria. Jose Eduardo Santos, he came from Angola, he left. Look at Robert Mugabe, that is him. Daniel Rapport Moi, that is him. Hossan Cloud, all of these leaders came and left. No, but Paul Biya of Cameroon, he came to stay. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the longest of them all, aside from the one in Guinea. Let's even look at those within his government. Amadou Ahidjo left in 1982. We saw that. Sadou Yatou died in 1996. We have Renée Ndongo, who also disappeared, just like that. John Good Foncha, of course, we know was betrayed and then later on died. These are all his allies, betrayed and those that he killed by himself. Ladies and gentlemen, in summary, it's a collapsing system. We have roads that swallow up cars. Cameroon is completely collapsed. Roads swallow up cars. You hear road accident every day. Hospitals are without doctors and without medicines. No nurses to attend to patients. Like we said, not up to 3 doctors can attend to 10,000 patients. Teachers left unpaid for months and months and months. We see all of this. You drowning in ocean, chasing a future elsewhere. This is a kind of leadership that is in Cameroon. And yet some people still stand to call for him to stand as a president for the upcoming election, which is deplorable. And so Paul Biya himself is not even the problem, but these people who stand to push him forward to to remain the president of Cameroon are the ones that we should be questioning. We all know that Cameroon's or Paul Biya's role has been a failure, not just for Cameroon, but for Africa as a whole. A man who was once seen as a leader with potential has instead become a symbol of everything that is wrong with African governance, corruption, dictatorship, and a complete disgrace and disregard for human life. That is why he can send his military, his brute rogue military into Ambazonia to kill without mercy. As Biya continues his 43rd year in power, the question remains, when will the world stand up for him? Why is the international community protecting him? When will the people of Cameroon reclaim their dignity? Will they continue? Cameroonians, you want to continue eating bread and sardine for the rest of your life? What is your future? What is the future for your children? The international community must demand an end to Biya's dictatorship, and the people of Cameroon must rise to reclaim their dignity, because us Ambazonians, we are gone and gone for good. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the reign of a dictator who still clings to power after 43 years. So let me say this to you. If you believe in justice for Cameroon and freedom for Ambazonia, kindly like this video, share and subscribe. Share this with the whole world, like everybody, because the truth cannot be hidden anymore. The truth needs to be told. These are the facts about this dictator in Cameroon, what he has done in southern Cameroon, and even to his own people. We've seen dumps, roads in Yaoundé, pigsties in the very capital, and yet these people still want to hold him as president. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and God bless you all.